Mixing vocals can be quite overwhelming and challenging, so in today's video we'll guide you through our full process, covering lots of tips and tricks so you'll be able to achieve a high quality vocal mix after you finish watching this video.
So a while back we made a song with our friend Max Olver, who happens to be a multi-platinum singer, songwriter, and producer, and you could actually watch him recording the vocals here that we'll be mixing today. For today's mixing session, he actually sent us all the relevant vocal stems already tuned, which means we could get a jump start already on the process. And what do we mean when we say, mixing vocals? So vocal mixing is the process of where we take a raw recording and we turn it into something that sounds much more polished and consistent overall, that blends seamlessly with our instrumental. And overall, what you want to achieve in this process is getting something that sounds very professional, engaging to our listener. So for starters, let's quickly see the stems that Max provided. So first of all, there's the lead, which is really our heart and focal point.
Hey, saw you from across the room.
And second, there's these left and right doubles, which are basically different takes of the lead that help our lead vocal sound more wide and complete by being panned hard left and right.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options.
Third, we also have some double layers sung one octave below and above our lead, adding even more body and richness.
Girl, you got a problem.
Fourth, Max recorded several backing vocals, basically harmonies, which are meant to emphasize certain words or lines of the lead vocal to create more emotion and impact.
Hold on, baby, tonight.
And finally, there are some ad-libs, which help make the song sound more interesting, for example, in this intro.
Yeah.
And in the final chorus.
Tonight I'ma tell you one thing. Show out.
And with that said, let's now get to the actual vocal mixing.
First of all, we want to set up our session. So let's start by dragging in both the instrumental and our vocal stems, which we want to color code, say, in green. Then we want to route each individual track to a separate mixer channel by selecting them all and choosing route selected channel starting from this track in the mixer. And for any of the stems that are meant to be, say, a left or right double, like this double L track, let's hard pan them 100% left and right respectively. Okay. So next we want to create 4 buses so we can control the overall balance and processing of each vocal type more easily. So we could create a lead bus, a doubles bus, a harmonies bus, as well as an ad-libs bus to which we'll assign a different color for each, say purple. And we'll route all the respective vocal stems to their matching bus. For example, the doubles bus will now control all the double vocal stems at once, making it easier to adjust their level or apply effects to them as a group, creating a more uniform and consistent result across. Then lastly, we want to create a master vocal bus, which we'll call vocal bus, to control the overall vocals and route the 4 vocal buses into this one. Let's color code that orange. And we'll also add 2 send channels, one for reverb and one for delay, and send just the lead bus to them, which allows us to apply effects, say reverb or delay, to the lead vocals without affecting any of the rest, keeping the mix clean while giving the vocals extra depth and space. We'll color code these 2 channels red.
Okay, so just by looking at the waveform of our lead, we can tell that some parts are much louder than others. So we want to correct that by creating a volume automation clip. Now, when doing this, we never automate the mixer volume sliders, as we want to leave those unautomated so they can be easily tweaked later. Instead, we always add an instance of Fruity Balance to the first slot of our mixer channel. We set the volume to 100% and we lower the mixer slider accordingly, so the output is the same volume level as before. Automating is much easier now, as we don't have to copy and paste specific values, but we can always just drag the automation points back to 100%. Now, to show you what the vocal automation process looks like, let's take this word round from the pre-chorus, which from the looks of it is much louder than everything else.
Wanna spin you round like a...
So what we'll do is set our snap to none, so we're not limited to exact quantization settings. We'll right click right before the word round is sung. We right click again to create the automation point that will drag down to make the word less loud. And we create another automation point at the end of the word, where we want the volume to be back at or close to 100%. And we'll keep tweaking these points until the level of the word round sounds more constant overall, as well as more consistent with the level of the other words and phrases.
Wanna spin you round like a... Wanna spin you round like a...
And this is what we essentially want to do for the entire vocal, basically correcting any harsh or overwhelming words or phrases to get a consistent sounding vocal with no crazy peaks or bottoms, which will also mean any subsequent compressor will have to work less hard so we can achieve a more natural overall sound.
Got no time to waste, cause all I want is you, so DJ, don't you make it stop.
Okay, so we have things more leveled out on the lead, and this is when we want to apply some compression to further reduce our dynamic range, which is the difference between our loudest and our quietest parts. And doing this will result in the vocal becoming more consistent and level overall. For this, we'll be using RVox by Waves, which is a great plugin as it does an exceptional as well as quick job at getting a super consistent and upfront sound, really only having to tweak 2 knobs. First, there's the compression knob, which basically combines all our typical controls like the threshold and ratio into one fader. And as we lower the control, our dynamic range gets smaller, but our output level automatically increases. So that's why we'll have to compensate with the gain fader so we don't get like a crazy loud vocal. Now, to see it in action, we're going to play you the vocal with the compressor. You should pay attention to the little red bar in the fader, as this is showing you what's happening to the volume level of the vocal. So words that were sung more loudly are being lowered in volume more dramatically than the words that were recorded more quietly, meaning our dynamic range is getting more narrow and consistent. So let's play that.
Hurricane inside this club. Everybody's watching us. DJ, don't you make it stop.
Next, we want to get our vocal to sound as clean as possible. So to get a first pass of that, we're first getting rid of the lowest and highest frequencies of our vocal, really just to get rid of any unwanted bottom end and top end. And you can basically use any EQ plugin for this. Second, we want to focus on reducing any problematic areas that may cause an issue, such as unnecessary low mid information that could make the vocal sound too heavy or muddy, as well as resonant frequencies that are causing the recording to sound harsh or nasal, for example. Basically, we just want to clean up the vocal so it sounds a bit more polished and pleasant to the ear. So in this instance of Pro Q3, we're rolling off the low end to 150 Hz, since we can afford to roll off some more low end to get rid of unnecessary bottom without sacrificing any body. And we then have a bell curved cut at around 275 Hz, which is to reduce some mud and boxiness we heard listening back. We then have some cuts throughout to reduce any other resonant frequencies. At around 500 Hz there was some ringing. 800 Hz had a bit much of that radio sound. The 1K range had a bit of screechiness. And our upper range had a bit of hissing and harshness. Now, overall, the way to detect any of these unwanted frequencies is to create a very narrow bell curve, boost it quite a lot, and start moving it around the spectrum until you identify the ugliest sounding bits. And that's where you want to invert the boost into a cut to make sure that small frequency range is being attenuated. And you could also choose to make this cut dynamic if your EQ plugin allows it, which will make sure that the frequency range you selected will only be attenuated once it actually gets problematic, which might not be in every single word or syllable of your vocal.
Next, to remove any sibilants that may be found in the vocals, such as sharp S sounds, breaths, or any other unwanted noise in the high end range that may come after a particular word or phrase, we're using a de-esser. To do this, we're using FabFilter's de-esser with the frequency range set to 7K to 14K Hz, meaning this plugin is listening to this range only when deciding what to cut, which sounds like this. After which it, based on the threshold and range settings we've set here, is getting rid of the following bits of our vocal. So let's play that. And as you'll notice, the difference becomes clearer when we A/B this plugin while playing a word that contains a sharp S. So let's play again.
So
as you can tell, the de-esser makes sure that the S sounds much less sharp while still being audible.
So that's really it for our lead vocal, but of course we also have our doubles, harmonies, and ad-libs that all work in harmony to provide support and warmth to the lead. And the goal is to kind of wrap them around our lead to bring and glue everything together. So what we'll do next is copy the lead vocal chain we just created, which we'll do by right-clicking the lead channel, hitting File, and then dragging the Save Mixer Track state as to the other buses, like the doubles, the harmonies, and the ad-libs, which basically means that all of these tracks are now being processed similar to the lead, although we want to get rid of the instance of fruity balance on these chains. Now we want these to be processed similarly, but not exactly the same, so we can now easily make some tweaks. For example, we're applying some more compression on our supporting buses to make things sound tighter and a bit more squashed, and this can be seen through the more aggressive compression settings on the instances of RVOX.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options.
Which helps the vocals sound even more locked in.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options.
Also, we want our doubles to wrap around the lead in particular to create more depth and width. So that's why we're adding a stereo imager to the doubles bus to provide some very subtle extra width to our vocals.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options.
So in general, processing all the backing stems together using groups is making things more efficient by saving us time really, but it also kind of makes sense to regard them as one single instrument because that's what they essentially are, right? Like together they basically are our choir. So processing them more uniformly helps achieve a more cohesive sound while we're still able to fix any problems occurring specifically from one stem inside the individual tracks, as these mixer tracks are still available to us as well.
Now, as we said before, our best course of action is linking all of our individual tracks to buses, which we're in turn routing to one general bus, which we'll call the vocal bus. And this is where we're going to apply the meat of the effects to our vocals to make sure we get a uniform sound throughout all the vocal elements, as everything will be applied equally among all subgroups. And the logic of this effect chain we're applying here is very similar to what we did on the lead bus before. We'll need some compression for more consistency among the elements, some EQ instances for tonal fixes and improvements, and any other plugins that may improve the sound of our vocals and the way it sits in our mix. So as for compression, we're using the LA2A compressor by UAD, which is a beautiful emulation of the Teletonix compressor from the 1960s, and we're using this because of its intuitiveness, efficiency, and great sound. So just like the RVOX, this plugin makes applying compression very easy and direct by offering really two main controls, which is great. And besides that, we also get a taste of that analog character, while it most crucially manages to create a much more consistent performance within our vocals by taming the peaks, which we can verify both using our ears and eyes. We can then check through the VU level indicator. So let's play with and without. So I'm going to play without first.
Do it like you hold on, baby, tonight. I'm gonna show you how we
And this is with.
do it like you hold on, baby, tonight. I'm gonna show you how we show out until the
Now, as for the EQ instances we've mentioned before, we have an instance of Pro Q3 on our vocal bus to again roll off any unnecessary low end, which becomes quite audible if we audition the portion that we're cutting in solo and crank up the volume. And also you'll see these narrow cuts over here, which are actually dynamic bell curves that duck throughout playback. And their goal is to remove any resonant frequencies whenever they occur to make the vocal sound more pleasing to the ear. Next, given our love for analog gear but lack of physical experience for it, we gravitated to the SSL emulator from Brainworks, which through its analog EQ functionality is adding quite a bit of body, clarity and strength to our vocal, but doing so in a way that is not too overbearing.
hold on, baby, tonight. Hold on, baby, tonight.
We then have a Pultec EQ from UAD, and the magic of this comes from the famous Pultec trick, which involves both boosting and cutting the same frequency, in this case around 100 Hz, to add additional warmth and body on the one hand, while removing any muddiness at the same time, which creates a full and rich sound while still sounding clean. And we're applying the same trick to our high end at around 12k Hz, which is definitely bringing out some more air and brightness.
Girl, you got a problem. Girl, you got a problem.
Then we have another instance of Pro Q3, and this is for additional cleaning. Like, it's basically doing the same thing as our previous instance of Pro Q3, but we're applying it again because this time we want to clean up any of the artifacts that were added by our previous analog effects. So we're again rolling off our unnecessary low end, we're taming some of the upper, harsher sounding frequencies, And we're also boosting a bit in the low mids for some more body. Next, our de-esser again gets rid of any sharp S's or breaths, really just to prevent any sharp and harsh parts from cutting your ears when listening back, especially if you're listening at a high volume level. Then we're applying an instance of Silk Vocal by Waves, which, similar to Soothe 2, but at only a fraction of its cost, cleans up the vocal in the lows, the mids, and the highs by using some smart algorithm to decide where and when processing of unwanted resonances should occur.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options.
And finally, we're subtly adding this 3-dimension expander plugin to add a bit of extra width to all of the elements, almost creating a bit of a 3D effect, which becomes especially noticeable when we increase the wet knob.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options.
Now, of course, we've been walking you through all the individual steps on the vocal bus, but to get a sense of the big picture, let's listen to what our chorus vocals sound like before and after applying all the effects on our vocal bus, both with and without our instrumental.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options.
Now, as you could tell, our vocals sound quite dry, right? So that's why we want to create some ambience as well as some sense of space, which we'll do through instances of reverb and delay on the send channels, which we created before. So there are a few important reasons why we're using send channels for these effects instead of just adding them on our buses or individual channels. First, by using a dedicated send channel, we have much more control and flexibility in the amount of effect being applied, as we have the capability of balancing both our dry and wet signal without having to sacrifice dry signal for wet signal, which would be the case if we added our reverb on our bus or individual channels. Also, we could add any effect before or after the reverb and delay instances, meaning we could get very creative with this. And another plus to the send channel approach is efficiency, in that we could just route any bus or track that needs reverb or delay to the relevant send channel. Meaning we could just set these channels up once, and then we could simply decide which track should receive reverb or delay, which really at this point is just our lead. So on the reverb send channel, we're using our beloved Valhalla Vintage Verb, and it's very important to set the wet level to 100% because we really want the audio coming out of our send to be wet reverb only. And here's what that sounds like. Now, one tip we'd like to give out that it is both fun and important to automate your effects throughout the track. Say, for instance, our reverb, where we can have, for example, a more dramatic effect in the chorus while dialing that down in our verses. So what we're doing specifically here is automating the volume knob on our Fruity Send instance of the lead bus, and we're making sure that the reverb volume is slightly higher in the choruses, as well as after some words like hey, which are followed by quite a bit of silence. And the higher reverb volume at these moments really just fills up these spaces with some additional ambience. So let's take a listen to that.
Hey, hey.
Also, we wanted the bridge vocals to sound more atmospheric, so what we're doing to achieve that is adding another reverb instance, but with a longer decay or tail, and we're only enabling that during our bridge as well as during some other short moments found within the song.
Oh, I never ever felt this type of rush.
And as we've briefly mentioned before, another great thing about using the send is that we can apply effects to our effect, which is exactly what we're doing here by having some saturation through an instance of Magma BB tubes after the Vintage Verb instance, which makes our reverb sound much more alive and full. So take a look at that. And we also have an instance of the S1 imager by Waves, which makes the reverb sound wider. Now, on the delay send channel, we're using the stock Fruity Delay Bank plugin with a quarter note delay. And to shape this effect sonically, we're adding a Pro Q3 after, which kind of gives us this phone effect by getting rid of all the bottom and high frequencies. And finally, we're adding an instance of this free plugin called Pancake, which is essentially an effect that makes our sound go left and right all the time, creating more movement and preventing our delay from sounding static or stale. And after playing with the volume sliders of our reverb and delay send channels, here's what our vocals sound like both with and without our instrumental.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options. Girl, you got a problem. Way too many options.
Okay, so we're almost there. Our mix is pretty much glued together at this point, but we've mainly been working at the group and the send level lately, right? So the final thing left for us to do is diving back into the individual track level and making any tweaks wherever needed. So what this looks like is we're basically constantly listening to the song in our DAW, we're exporting it, we're going to our car to listen, then playing on our phone, and we'll be writing down any notes as we go along, asking ourselves questions like, can we hear every word well enough? Are certain parts too loud or too quiet? Or do some parts need more or less reverb? To then return to our computer to make the necessary tweaks, and then we just keep repeating this process until our vision is finally achieved. For example, we can change the levels of individual tracks in case something like an ad-lib or harmony may be too quiet or too loud. What we typically do to fix that is we choose the slice mode. We set the relevant audio tracks declicking mode to generic, which is going to create some subtle fades whenever we slice. We then make a slice both before and after the part of the track that needs adjusting. And finally we tweak the gain knob inside the playlist track, which makes sure only the part we just sliced out is affected, while leaving the other parts of the vocal unchanged. Also, this part of the process is when we figured out that our high post-chorus vocals need some more compression, given that some parts of it were very audible, while others were barely audible at all. So we dove back into the individual channel of this track and dialed up the compression settings.
Hold on, baby, tonight I'm gonna show you how we
And finally, we also figured that some of the harmony stems sounded a bit dry at times, so that's why we sent some of our individual harmony channels to the reverb send channel, and this in turn ensures the vocal just feels a bit more spacious and helps everything sit in the mix better.
hold on. Hold on, baby, tonight I'm gonna show you.
Now, overall, this is a process that requires quite a bit of investment in terms of going back and forth between like our studio setup, the car, the phone, earphones, maybe even using a Bluetooth speaker, as we'll have to keep in mind that most people listening to the song eventually are going to be listening on playback devices like that. Now, with that said, we'd like to thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel to become part of our community of musicians and music lovers, and see you next time.
Girl, you got a problem. Way too many